Hi everyone, we are going to do a Nearpod activity today, and I also wanted to give you the option to go through this via screencast, just in case you prefer that method. If you'd like to not listen to me today, that's okay too. So I'm not going to take offense any way you want to go to it here. But in case you wanted to have me go through some of the information, I wanted to give you that option too. So here is the Nearpod you have access to. I'm going to kick ahead to the second slide here of it, and it has the objectives for this lesson. And actually, before I get too hasty, let's get back to the topic. The day's topic is the Battle of the Ironclads, happening March 8th to 9th of 1862. It's a legendary naval battle that totally changed the future of navies forever, and what navies are today, and what they were from that day forward. And the objectives are to identify the terrible nature of war and explain why it should be avoided if possible. It's one of the big things here that I'm going to develop over a couple of different lessons is how bad this war truly was, how it affects people's lives, how it affects families, and how war, no matter the era, no matter if you're talking about the Civil War, World War I, World War II, wars of today, but we should be trying to avoid war. We ourselves, in our positions, we're not like none of us have been soldiers. We don't know what war truly is. If you have a brother, a sister, a cousin that's a soldier, they may understand, but you and I probably don't fully understand because we never put on the uniform and actually went into battle. But war is terrible, and we have to understand like it's life changing, and it's life changing for everyone, including the civilians in that country. Now, our second objective is determine the effects the war has upon scientific innovation in the world as a whole. Okay, so this slide here really just continues to tell the story that I've already been mentioning, that these days of naval warfare change the future of navies, as well as showing how terrible war truly is and how we should avoid it. Now, to get into the story of the Battle of the Ironclads, those 2 days that changed naval warfare, we must start first with talking about Fort Sumter back at the start of the war. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, the Confederacy decided they needed to try to take every possible fort they could, every shipping yard, so they could try to gather as many wartime materials as they possibly could. They needed guns, they needed ships, they needed everything necessary in order to fight against a war against the North. And so they went and attacked the Norfolk, Virginia shipping yard in April of 1861. Now, when taking that shipping yard, they found a couple of ships that were quite useful to them. So they took over a couple of ships, and specifically, one of them was it was a little bit broken down, but they could restructure it and make sure it's going to be strong for future battles. And the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, realized the Confederacy did not have the capacity and did not have the shipbuilding facilities that were going to help them to be able to build a lot of ships. They weren't going to be able to like build 500 ships, not right away at least. And so he realized they have to be pretty inventive and do something new to try to have a solid navy. So he wanted to experiment with iron-sided ships. What they did is they took one of those old wooden ships known as the Merrimac. They added iron plating to the outside, gave it 2 engines, not just one, put 12 cannon on it, and they rechristened it, renamed it the CSS Virginia. But it is a beast in the sea, but it is one of the first ironclad ships ever devised, ever created. And it had this iron plating on the sides, which was extremely strong. The Southern papers caught wind of this, and they started publishing some stories about this great Confederate ironclad, and the North took notice of that. Specifically, Gideon Welles, the guy you see on the left, the U.S. Secretary of the Navy, read these reports that the South was publishing about this great Southern ship, and so he realized the North was deficient here. They didn't have an ironclad ship. They did not have any of this kind of new age technology. And so he put out a contest to try to have Northern shipbuilding inventors design an ironclad of their own. The one person they really wanted to get a design from was a Swedish born inventor by the name of John Ericsson. He was known as a shipbuilding genius. And at first, he wasn't going to enter the contest, but eventually his friends said, like, what are you waiting for, man? You are the preeminent inventor of ships in our country. Please, 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 will you make a ship? And so he did. And he invented this little ship called the Monitor. which everybody looked at and thought, this thing is ridiculous. It's barely seaworthy. It has hardly any of its space above the sea level, and it only has two cannon. You can only see one in the picture, but it's got a two gun, rotating gun turret, and it is mini. It's only 175 feet long. Most ships at the time were at least 5 times that size, if not bigger. And so this is a mini ship, but the thing is actually quite mighty with what it does in battle. And that's called the Monitor. You can see this gun turret right there. And even the ship's crew didn't know if it was actually going to float. They were a little bit afraid to get into the thing, but they did anyway. But the biggest story here of the entire 2 days that changed naval history is actually the first day where a metal ship takes on 5 wooden ships. And this is where the death and devastation really kicks into this battle. On March 8th of 1862, the Merrimac, as it was called before, or the CSS Virginia now, that's named now, takes on 5 gigantic wooden ships, huge wooden ships, each one having at least 20 cannon on it, some of them having over 30 cannon on it, and it demolishes 2 of these ships. So the best ships that the Union had to this point, some of the most successful ships around any navy in the world, it just demolishes 2 of these ships and also defeats another one but doesn't put it in the sea. Now, to the devastation. The first attack that the Merrimac/Virginia makes is against the USS Congress. The USS Congress is a beast of a ship, a 35 cannon, and none of it. The crew of the Congress wasn't even worried. They didn't even think that the CSS Virginia was that great of a ship, this ironclad ship. So they see it and they think, oh, we have 35 cannon, we'll be fine. But none of those cannon has any chance of piercing the iron siding of the CSS Virginia, the southern ironclad ship. The first cannon blast from the Merrimac kills 9 sailors on that wooden ship, the USS Congress. Shards of wood splitting open these bodies. The second cannon blast kills an entire artillery team on the Union ship of the USS Congress, blasting off both of the Congress's captain's arms at the shoulder at the same exact time. One of the next shots hits a cannon muzzle and blasts it right off. The muzzle zooms through the air and rips off Henry Marmaduke's arm. The captain of the USS Congress, Joseph Smith, refuses to surrender to the Merrimac, to that southern ship. But a Confederate cannonball strikes him in the head and fully decapitates him. Confederate Lieutenant Robert Minor finally boarded the USS Congress to take over the ship, and the Congress's crew fired upon him and struck him with a musket ball right next to his heart. And Minor dies that day. A sailor right next to Minor had one of the musket balls lodged directly in his eye, and still the Confederates took the USS Congress and then turned the attack onto the Cumberland. So they defeated the Congress, and they move on to the next wooden ship the Union had, and that's the USS Cumberland. For the Virginia, the CSS Virginia, the southern ship, made quick work of the 50-cannon Cumberland, slamming it with its battering ram, leaving a 7-foot wide gash in the boat. Even after it became clear that the Cumberland was going to go down, was going to capsize, the crew kept firing, hoping they could take down that Confederate ironclad ship, the Virginia, with it, hoping that if our ship goes down, we're taking them with us. A Cumberland gunner had both legs shot off but continued to fire the cannon, swinging his body using his elbows. So this guy had both legs shot off while he's in this wooden ship trying to operate a cannon, and he literally kept going. He was swinging his body, putting his elbows on the ground, trying to get himself moving so he could pull at the fuse to light the cannon and send more shots at the Confederate ironclad ship. A second gunner lost both of his arms in the fight, but he kept on encouraging his men, shouting for him, give him fits, keep fighting, and just trying to get him jacked up to keep going. And then the ship's going down, but the wounded, they never even got out. The Congress had 121 casualties, and survivors were able to swim to the shore. They had to hear, even the ones that did survive, had to hear the screams of the wounded as they swam to safety. The Congress went down as it burned in the sea. Where it went down, the casualty count on that ship was 219. And then finally, there's one more ship that's the CSS Virginia had pushed into a sandbar that day and disabled it temporarily, and that's the USS Minnesota. Lucky for the crew, the Monitor, the Union ironclad ship, showed up just in time at 9 p.m. on March 8th. Now, you'll have a question you got to answer here, so you're going to come back to the presentation and get to that question, but I want to move on here for now. That night, the U.S. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton heard about what happened down in Hampton Roads, Virginia, out in the sea, out near the Atlantic coast. He and Lincoln were absolutely petrified, and they told every single major city to be prepared for a coastal attack from this ship. What if this ship comes up towards Washington, D.C. and decides to just lay cannonballs under our capital? What if it comes up to Philadelphia and decides to destroy that city? What if it goes to Baltimore? What if it goes to Boston? What if it goes everywhere and just destroys all of our major cities? They were so freaked out by the possibilities of the CSS Virginia. That shows you how serious this situation was and how this event had the chance of changing naval history forever. The morning came the next day, and the Virginia their crew thought that they were going to finish off what they started. They were going to take out the rest of that wooden ship called the USS Minnesota, and the Confederates were going to take the day on that second day too. But little did it know that this little giant ship showed up over the night. This ship called the USS Monitor, this little guy right here. The two ships then approached each other and engaged in a 4-hour duel. Even though you had hundreds of cannonballs that blasted off the sides of both ships, neither ship was able to pierce each other's armor. 22 sailors did die from some of the cannon blasts and some of the fires on the ships, but the ships did not go down. At 12:30 p.m., a cannon blast blinded the Monitor's captain, so went into that rotating gun turret, started a fire, blinded the captain, and the Virginia, well, both ships actually turned away. Each side said the other side turned away first and went back home first. That both sides basically claimed victory. But in reality, the ending to this entire battle is simply a draw. No one truly won this battle. Word traveled fast from this battle in these 2 days in naval history. Word traveled fast and went back to England. And in their papers, they actually mentioned in the days afterwards that they needed to update their naval fleet. They realized that their fleet was now inferior. They are going to have metal ships if they're going to have the preeminent world navy. And if you think about navies today, the world today is filled with metal fleets. We no longer have wooden fleets of ships. We know that wooden ships are absolutely inferior. So when you think about the kind of fleets, when you think about the kind of ships that our Navy produces today, they would never dream of producing a wooden ship. But these days here, on March 8th and 9th of 1862, totally changed the naval world from that point forward to producing metal ships. Now, the last thing you have here is a time to climb activity. So I do want you to go through the Nearpod, and I want you to complete these questions to show what you've learned throughout this presentation. All right, have a good one.